So there's one other thing we can do with loops, and that's to include an else clause. Experienced programmers often avoid using else in this way, and that's because less experienced programmers can struggle to understand their code. But it's something you might come across, so I want to cover it here. We've seen else when we looked at testing conditions using if, but it can also be used at the end of loops. It's possibly an unfortunate word to use for what it does with loops though, because its use doesn't imply otherwise in any sense. What it does is cause a block of code to be executed if the loop was allowed to continue to the end. In other words, if the loop wasn't broken out of. With what we've covered so far, any example we use will either be contrived or could be written better some other way. I don't like showing you code that could be written better, so the first example will be a bit contrived. So let's assume we've noticed that lottery numbers divisible by 8 are less likely to appear. Now I know that's not realistic. I did say this example was contrived. We want to write some code that will check a list of numbers and let us know if the list contains any values that are divisible by 8. So let's start with a new file. We'll call this one contrive.py. And we'll start with the new list as well. Numbers is equal to left and right square brackets 1, 45, 32, 12 and 60. Now we're going to look at lists in the next section. All we need to know here is that they're enclosed in square brackets and are a sequence type. So we know that we can iterate over sequences. We did that a lot with the string type. Let's try out some code. So I'm going to type for number in numbers, colon, if number percent, which is the remainder operator 8, is equal to 0, colon, and for a comment here I'm going to put reject the list. We're going to print out a message, print, parentheses, double quotes, the numbers are unacceptable. And we'll also break. So here what we're doing for each number in the list, we're checking if it's exactly divisible by 8 using the modulo or remainder operator. If it is, we print a message rejecting the list and break out of the loop. Now these numbers should be rejected because we've got the value 32 in the list. So we run the program and the numbers are rejected. So that works, but let's see what happens with the list of numbers that aren't divisible by 8. So I'm going to change the 32 to a 31. Run the code again. And you see this time we don't get the message that they're unacceptable, which we're expecting having changed 32 back to 31. So the code works, but it's not very friendly. It hasn't given us any output. So what would be a lot friendlier is if we got a message saying that these numbers were okay. So this is where Python's else can be useful when used in a loop. When our loop finds a value that's not acceptable, our code breaks out of the loop, as we saw the first time we ran the program. That means the loop will only terminate normally if all the values are acceptable. So what we want to do is run some code when the loop terminates normally. We don't want that code to execute if we break out of the loop, only when it goes all the way around. And that's exactly what else does. So let's see that working. So I'm going to put an else here on line 8, colon, and print, parentheses, double quotes, all those numbers are fine. So if we run the program, this time we get the message, all those numbers are fine. We didn't break out of the loop in other words, and the code in the else block is executed. Now when I change this to include an unacceptable number, we'll change 12 to 16. Run that again. This time we get the output, the numbers are unacceptable. In other words, we've broken out of the loop, and because the loop didn't terminate normally, the code in the else block, this is the code on line 9, didn't get executed. Now once again, take careful notice of the indentation. This is particularly tricky here, as an else can follow both the if or the for statements. It's only the indentation level that ties the else to the for. Here, the else on line 8 is at the same level as the for on line 3. That means else is associated with the for loop and not with the if statement. Alright, so that was a contrived example to show how else works when it's used with a loop. You may want to step through the code in the debugger to see exactly what's happening. If you do, remember to change 16 back to 12 and debug the code again, and that'll let you see the else block executing when the loop terminates normally. Alright, so moving on, in the next video, we'll see a more realistic use of else. See you in the next video.